a candle that burns without flame, illusion or warning. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Tell me where you're listening from. Your voices keep this mystery alive. I can't wait to read your comments. Let's begin. You'd think by now I'd be used to people showing up at the brownstone with their hats in their hands and their troubles spilling out faster than Fritz can whip an omelet. But the truth is, every new knock on the door carries the chance of a fresh mess. Usually one Wolfe swears he has no interest in, until he decides it's worth his time after all. This particular Tuesday evening, the knock came while Wolfe was performing his nightly ritual of glaring at the world through the pages of a 17th century cookbook. I was the one who answered. Naturally. A woman stood there, tall and deliberate, the sort of person who walked like she already knew the floor plan. She had a small wooden box under her arm, about the size of a hat case, but much too plain to hold anything as cheerful. She asked for Nero Wolfe in a tone that suggested she expected to be admitted without delay. I let her in. Anyone carrying a box that carefully probably isn't here to sell vacuum cleaners. She had the kind of face that suggested intelligence came before warmth, though she wasn't bad looking. She introduced herself as Miss Eleanor Vance. The name meant nothing to me, though the way she said it carried weight, like it ought to be engraved on brass plates somewhere. When I guided her into the office, Wolfe looked up from his chair with the expression of a man interrupted in the middle of an especially delicate sauce. His lips pressed together and his brow furrowed as if every uninvited guest was an insult to civilization. Miss Vance didn't blink. She walked straight up to Wolfe's desk, set the wooden box down like she was placing an urn on an altar, and said, "Mr. Wolfe, this is not a case of murder. Not yet, but it is, I think, a case of betrayal." That was a nice way to hook his attention without saying anything specific, though he only arched one eyebrow and didn't offer a word. Wolfe has made an art of silence. People usually feel compelled to fill it. Miss Vance didn't. She undid the brass clasp on the box and lifted the lid. Inside was a candle, or what was supposed to be one, a tall ivory stick mounted in a silver base with a black wick that looked singed but had never carried flame. It gave off no scent, no waxy residue, just a strange, cold impression, as if it had been made to mock the very idea of light. I said, "Lady, if you're looking for the antique shop down the street, you took a wrong turn." She shot me a glance that could cut wallpaper, then returned her focus to Wolfe. This candle was lit in the presence of 4 people 2 nights ago. It burned brightly enough, though when the gathering ended, no wax had melted, and the wick was untouched. And the man who brought it into the room swore it, proved something about loyalty. I glanced at Wolfe. He had leaned back, fingers pressing against each other under his chin. That meant his brain was already tightening screws. He asked, in his most dispassionate tone, "And the betrayal?" Miss Vance hesitated, then said, "That night something was taken from me. Something I cannot accuse without proof. The candle was at the center of it all. Now, if you're wondering whether this was when Wolfe's eyes lit up with interest, no. They closed halfway, like shutters in a rainstorm, but I've known him long enough to tell the difference between dismissal and consideration. This was the latter. "I require facts, madam," Wolfe said. "Not allegories. A candle that burns without consuming itself may be trickery, metaphor, or madness. What was taken?" "Letters," she said quietly. "Letters that could ruin a man who doesn't deserve ruin, and empower one who very much does." I could tell Wolfe was in for it, though he wouldn't admit it yet. As for me, I knew the evening had just traded comfort for complications. The brownstone had been disturbed, and when that happens, someone always ends up sweating. 9 times out of 10, it's not Wolfe. I'm not a connoisseur of candles. If I'm looking at a flame, I prefer it under a stake. But even I could tell there was something showy and self-important about the ivory stick in the box, as if it had rehearsed for a role as an omen. Miss Eleanor Vance stood with her hands folded, waiting on Wolfe the way a chess clock waits on a move. Wolfe set down the cookbook, steepled his fingers, and told me to take notes, which I did, because it's my burden in life to make sure his memory never has to work up a sweat. "The letters," he said. "Whose are they? What do they contain? And who profits and loses by their circulation?" "They were written by Alden Farrow," she said. "He died in January. He was a patron of a small arts foundation I direct, Gallery Row Trust. He wrote privately to me during his illness, not as a donor, but as a man frightened that a younger protégé was being maneuvered out of his rightful work. If those letters are made public unedited, they could be spun to accuse the protégé of fraud. If they are withheld, a different man gains leverage over our board." "Names," Wolfe said, not looking at the candle. "The protégé is Ethan Rook, young, talented, reckless in a charming way. He doesn't deserve ruin. The man who does is Ambrose Sykes. He has a taste for control and a talent for the kind of philanthropy that leaves people owing him. He wants to chair the trust and fix its acquisitions according to his friendships. The letters could be twisted to justify that." Wolfe's eyelids lowered a fraction. "Your gathering 2 nights ago?" "At Sykes's townhouse," she said. "He invited 4 of us. Himself, me, Ethan, and his attorney, Marcus Dell. A 5th guest arrived with the candle. Dr. Severin Ames, a psychologist who consults on group trust dynamics. We were to discuss a potential bequest from Farrow's estate. Sykes made a display of the candle, saying it burned only when there was concord. Dr. Ames called it a ritual of reliability. He lit it. It shone cleanly. He said that was proof that we could speak freely, that no one would behave in bad faith. When we finished and the candle was extinguished, I discovered my valise had been unlatched and the portfolio with the letters gone. "Poof," I said. "Concord evaporated." She gave me another sheet metal glance. I had brought a typed copy and the originals, thinking the originals would never leave my possession. Stupid, I know, but Sykes insisted that his lawyer verify the provenance. Someone took both sets. "Where were you seated?" Wolfe asked. "Relative to the candle and your valise." She described the room like a floor plan. Sykes behind a writing table, Attorney Dell to his right, Dr. Ames presiding at a sideboard with the candle in a silver base like the one in our box, Ethan restless by the window, and she, Eleanor, on a settee near a lacquered screen. Her valise had been tucked on the floor between settee and screen. While Ames spoke about trust and light, people shifted. Ethan poured himself water. Sykes rang for a servant. Dell stood to examine a folder. No one, on paper, had time to do a dignified stoop and swipe on her valise, but paper has its limitations. "What about staff?" I asked. Sykes run the kind of house where trays glide in and out like swans. "One butler," she said. "A man named Kever. Soft-footed, courteous, and, if you had asked me then, harmless. Also a maid who brought the coffee at the end. Neither had reason to know what the letters were." Wolfe closed his eyes. For a man who claims to despise metaphors, he lets silence do a lot of heavy lifting. "Why bring me a candle?" he asked finally. "Why not the police?" She looked down at her hands. The toughness around her eyes wasn't for decoration. It had been earned. Because if the police are involved, Sykes will claim the letters were forged to extort him. Dell will apply pressure. The board will panic. Ethan's reputation will be dirt by morning. I need the letters back quietly, or enough leverage that Sykes returns them. The candle is the key to how it was done. I don't know how, but I know. I'd seen Wolfe ignore clients for less. He doesn't take kindly to being asked to pull rabbits out of symbolic hats. But I could tell 2 things were working on him. 1, a problem that came wrapped in a claim about truth and ritual is bait to a man who reveres procedure. 2, the brownstone had been infiltrated by a box with a puzzle in it, and that is the kind of trespass that stings. "Your fee," he said. as if we'd already signed. He named a number that would make an honest person wonder if honesty paid. Miss Vance didn't blink. She said yes and asked for a receipt. That put us on a footing. "Archie," Wolfe said, "telephone Mr. Parker at the Gazette. Ask what he knows of Ambrose Sykes and Dr. Severin Ames, and fetch Mr. Panzer." He glanced at the wall clock. "Number this evening, I suppose, though it's an infliction. In the morning I'm in the plant rooms from 9 to 11. It was an infliction. Getting Wolfe to do anything after dinner besides read and drink beer requires one of three prerequisites: money, malice, or orchids in peril. Money had shown its face. Malice was loitering nearby. Before I could reach the phone, the doorbell went off like a reminder that fate doesn't call ahead. I went to the hall and opened up to a man in a raincoat that was trying to look more expensive than it had a right to. He was mid-40s, tall, smooth-faced, except for a crease that ran from nose to mouth like a stitched seam. He had a card out ready to hand me as if I were a vending machine. Marcus Dell, attorney at law. The name matched the night's cast list. "I need to see Mr. Wolfe," he said, and made the kind of move that suggests he has done well barging into rooms that didn't invite him. "What you need," I told him, "is a different hobby. You can see Mr. Wolfe if he wants to see you. Meanwhile, you can see me. I'm the scenic route." We held each other's eyes long enough to establish that neither of us was going to do anything regrettable to the upholstery. He adjusted his tie and tried a new tack. "Miss Vance came here with property belonging to my client, Ambrose Sykes, a particular item. I'm authorized to retrieve it without escalation." I didn't ask him to define escalation. I enjoy surprises, but not in the office. "If you mean a candle," I said, "we're developing a taste for mood lighting. You can lodge your authorizations by mail." He didn't smile. Lawyers who serve men like Sykes save their smiles for invoices. "If Mr. Wolfe harbors stolen material, the police—" From behind me came Wolfe's voice, resonant enough to bounce off the walnut shelves. "Pfui! Mr. Dell, if you are capable of discretion, come in 5 steps and no more. If not, go." It's a measure of Wolfe's reputation that Dell paused, took exactly 5 steps, and stopped at the edge of the rug like a dog that knows the limit of a leash. He eyed Miss Vance, who hadn't moved. The little muscle in his cheek picked up a beat. "Miss Vance," he said, "you have made an error. Mr. Sykes is willing to overlook it if the item is returned at once. The candle is a proprietary device. Dr. Ames's intellectual property. Then Dr. Ames can light it for the police," she said, cool and neat. "They can admire the absence of wax." Dell turned the full weight of his attention on Wolfe. "I respect your reputation, sir, but you would be wise not to embroil yourself in a board matter. Your client, if she is your client, has misinterpreted an evening of good faith discussion and a simple ceremonial." Wolfe made a small sound that meant don't. "Do not insult our hearing. Miss Vance alleges a theft. Your client hosted the occasion. Your consultant supplied the bauble, and Miss Vance departed lighter by certain papers. If your purpose is to frighten me into surrendering an object voluntarily delivered to me in the service of uncovering a crime, you misjudge me. If your purpose is to preen, you misjudge your audience." Dell studied him, recalibrated, and put the glare away. "Very well. I've discharged my instruction. I will advise Mr. Sykes that Miss Vance intends to escalate. He will respond accordingly." He glanced at the box. "Be careful, Mr. Wolfe. Symbols are flammable." He gave me a look that might have been designed to mark me for later and left without needing a push. When I came back to my chair, Wolfe had his mouth tucked in a line I associate with indigestion or stupid people. He rang for beer, which Fritz produced with the speed of a man who knows the rates of combustion in this household. Wolfe drank half the glass and addressed Miss Vance again. "Dr. Ames," he said. "You have met him before?" "Once," she said. "He gave a talk at the Trust titled The Ritual of Reliability. He believes that groups make better decisions when they enact a shared pledge. He used the candle as a teaching device. Sykes was impressed. I was not. Yet you attended his performance, Wolfe said. It wasn't optional, she said. Sykes funds 1/3 of our operating budget. He required me to attend and to bring the Faro file to satisfy Dell that the letters were real. Ethan was there to witness, and because Sykes dangles grants like fruit over his head. Wolfe's eyes shifted to me. You will see Mr. Parker. Also telephone Mr. Panzer. Ask him to locate Dr. Severin Ames's address and the source of these candles. If they are proprietary, there will be a manufacturer or a craftsman. If they are unique, there will be a story. On it, I said. And Sykes. He will come, Wolfe said. He cannot help himself. Men who cultivate control cannot bear a question mark in a room that belongs to another man. Miss Vance smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her skirt. What do you require from me tonight? Names and numbers, he said, and an accurate account of small motions, who poured, who gestured, who touched the table, who set down a glass and where. People who commit thefts while congratulating themselves on their trust-leave redolenzas. We will catch the scent. We spent 30 minutes walking through the evening like a slow dance with footnotes. She remembered that Ames asked to dim the lamps, to let the candle's integrity be visible. She remembered that Dell kept one hand on a folder he hadn't opened and the other near a fountain pen that never wrote. She remembered that Sykes rang, but Kever didn't come at once. He arrived 30 seconds later, which is an eternity in butler time. She remembered that Ethan, who is the kind who drums fingers when he's thinking, stopped drumming during one of Ames's little speeches and stared at the wick like it had said his name. When she had given us all she had, Wolfe closed his eyes again and nodded. You will go home, he said. You will answer no calls from Sykes. Mr. Goodwin will contact you in the morning. That was the dismissal, but the brownstone wasn't done being a public thoroughfare. The phone rang. I had Parker on the brain and reached for it, but Wolfe held up a finger and took the call himself. That happens once a season and usually means drama. He said, Nero Wolfe, listened, and his mouth went flatter. No, he said. You may tell Mr. Sykes that if he wishes to speak with me, he may present himself tomorrow at 11:30. Until then, I do not consent to being harried in my home. Good evening. He hung up like the phone had offended him, then regarded the candle. Miss Vance, he said, I detest toys. Yet I will allow this one to remain here tonight. Mr. Goodwin, you will put the box in the safe. I did. The wick looked darker when the light hit it, like a hair crossed by ash. I shut steel on it and spun the dial. When Miss Vance left, I walked her to the door. The sidewalk had that late-hour hush that makes a city sound like it's holding its breath. A car idled across the street. She noticed it too. Her eyes flicked, then settled. They'll watch, she said. They won't act. Not yet. If they do, I said, we're housebroken, but we bite. She managed a brief smile and went down the steps with the poise of a woman who has chosen her battles and doesn't mind a little blood. The car didn't move. Back in the office, Wolfe had returned to his chair, but not to his book. That's how you know a case has entered. He doesn't read when his mind is furnishing a room with hypotheses. He picked up the bell for Fritz, then set it down again, then picked it up. No, he told himself. It is late. For beer, I said. You've been known to commit worse sins after 9. Bah, call Mr. Parker now, then Mr. Panzer. I did. Lon Cohen's man at the Gazette. Parker gave me the thumbnail on Sykes. Wall Street once, now money and foundations. Loves a camera, loves a microphone more. No criminal record, but a reputation for leaving people feeling grateful and compromised at the same time. Dr. Severin Ames was thinner copy, Ph.D. at Columbia, book on decision-making and councils, a couple of magazine profiles with pictures of him gesturing at candles like a man selling sincerity by the inch. Saul answered on the second ring in a voice that said he hadn't been asleep. Saul doesn't sleep so much as cool down. I gave him the names, the candle, and the ask. Ames's address, procurement on the candle, Kever the butler's history, and any mention of Ethan Rook that wasn't written by a gallery press office. He said he'd bring me something in the morning that didn't smell like press release. When I hung up, Wolfe had finally poured himself another half-inch of beer and allowed it to exist. "It is not the candle," he said, mostly to the ceiling. "It is what men permit themselves to do when a toy tells them they are virtuous." He closed his eyes. "That, Archie, is where theft hides. Not in darkness, heaven help me for saying so, but in the light men applaud." He stood exactly enough to press the button for Fritz and instruct breakfast to be earlier than usual, which is like asking the sun to get a move on. Then he sank back and looked at me. "In the morning," he said, "we will bait Mr. Sykes with the only thing he prizes above control, the appearance of control. We will invite him to demonstrate the candle in my office, and while he plays priest, we will count hands." "Shall I put out the good silver?" I asked. "Put out nothing," he said. "We will let him bring his own flame." He shut his eyes, which for Wolfe is as good as carving a plan in basalt. I went to lock up, noting as I passed the safe that I could still feel the candle in it the way you can feel a draft you can't see. The brown stone gets disturbed in degrees. Tonight it wasn't rattled. But it had recognized a new smell, and so had I. Morning in the brownstone always begins the same way unless someone has been inconsiderate enough to murder a man on the stoop. By 8, I had finished the paper. Fritz had finished reminding me that coffee is an art, and Wolfe had finished pretending to be above conversation while he polished off eggs with a sprinkle of tarragon. By 9, he had ascended to his plant rooms and left me to deal with phones, visitors, and my own restless curiosity. Saul Panzer arrived at 10:15 with the kind of face that tells you nothing except that he has already been everywhere you thought about going. He took a chair in the office and gave me his notes in the form of a neat packet, typed, because Saul likes his facts free of Archie's editorializing. I, of course, prefer to editorialize. Dr. Severin Ames, it turned out, had an address on Riverside Drive, an office with a brass plate that read Applied Group Psychology Institute and a reputation for charging executives heavy fees to make them chant together. His candles were not bought at Macy's. Saul traced them to a craftsman in Brooklyn who specializes in stage props. A dozen were made to order last fall under Ames's name. Their gimmick was simple. Wicks treated to glow but resist burning down for hours, the wax mixture engineered not to drip or melt in ordinary time. A trick candle, dressed up as a miracle. The butler, Kever, was harder. Saul had learned that he'd worked in 3 different houses over 15 years, all for wealthy men with reputations for being more feared than liked. Nothing criminal, but enough smoke to suggest he knew where to warm his hands. Ethan Rook, meanwhile, was as advertised, promising painter, messy finances, lots of reviews describing him as volatile in the flattering sense. Not married, but plenty of entanglements and a reputation for both loyalty and lapses. Wolfe came down from the orchids at 11, heavy-footed and scowling at the intrusion of daylight into his eyes. Saul repeated the essentials. Wolfe listened, his lips twitching once when Saul described the treated wick. "So," Wolfe said, "men were induced to confide their sincerity to a trick of chemistry, and the theft was executed while their credulity was engaged. We will demonstrate." Right on cue the doorbell rang, and I went to answer it. Ambrose Sykes arrived, looking like the frontispiece for Patron of the Arts. He had the kind of face a photographer would call distinguished if they were being paid enough, and he wore his hair brushed back like it was too proud to fall forward. Behind him was the lawyer, Dell, once again in his raincoat, even though it hadn't rained. "I'm expected," Sykes said, as if the stoop was beneath him. "You're expected," I told him. "But don't take that as enthusiasm. I let them in because Wolfe had set the stage, and you don't keep the guest villain pacing in the hall." Inside, Wolfe remained seated behind his desk, massive and motionless as an idol. He didn't rise, didn't extend a hand, just gestured faintly toward the red leather chairs. Sykes took the one nearest Wolfe. Dell perched on the other. Neither removed his coat. "You have summoned me," Sykes said, smooth as if he charged by the syllable. "I prefer not to be disturbed in my own house, but since Miss Vance has chosen to involve you, I will allow you to clarify your intentions." Wolfe's eyes closed. "Miss Vance brought me evidence of theft. She claims certain letters disappeared from her possession during an evening you hosted. She also brought me one of Dr. Ames's contrivances. Last night your lawyer attempted to retrieve it, claiming it proprietary. I declined to surrender it." Sykes's smile was built for magazine covers. "The candle is harmless, a novelty. Surely you do not lend it credence." "Pfui," Wolfe said. "It is a fraud. But its fraudulence is precisely what made theft possible. While Dr. Ames occupied your guests with assurances of trust, one of you, or your servant, tampered with Miss Vance's valise. I intend to establish which you have no standing," Dell said quickly. "If Miss Vance wishes to accuse, she may do so in court. Otherwise, this is a diversion." Wolfe ignored him. He addressed Sykes again. "You will arrange for Dr. Ames, Mr. Rook, and your man Kever to attend here this afternoon. We will repeat the ritual. We will observe closely." Sykes barked a short laugh. "You think to expose a thief with parlor tricks?" "My dear Mr. Wolfe, the trust is not a carnival." "You will comply," Wolfe said, his voice sinking lower. "Because if you do not, Miss Vance will speak to the police. She will speak to the press, and the public will learn that a man who styles himself a benefactor is fond of confidence games played with candles. I give you until 4. Sykes's eyes narrowed. Dell shifted, ready to protest, but Sykes lifted a hand to still him. "You overestimate your leverage, sir, but very well. If only to put an end to this charade. 4 o'clock." They stood as one, Sykes adjusting his cuffs with a snap. On their way out, Dell paused to give me a look intended to remind me that lawyers bite in slow motion but with sharp teeth. I let him have it. When they were gone, I asked Wolfe if we were really going to host a séance. "Not a séance," he said. "An experiment. The candle is a toy, but the men's reactions to it are not. Mr. Sykes is incapable of resisting a stage on which he may dominate. Dr. Ames is incapable of refusing an audience. Mr. Rook will be incapable of concealing his anxiety, and Kever, if he has guilt, will betray it when the light is lit. We will watch their hands, their eyes, their intervals of breath. Meanwhile," I said, "Saul is going to find out whether Kever's guilty past comes with footnotes." "Precisely. You will also fetch Mr. Kramer," that jolted me. "Wolfe doesn't invite Inspector Kramer to his office unless he wants fireworks." "I thought you wanted quiet." "I want certainty," Wolfe said, "and if the outcome is incriminating, it will not rest on my word alone." Kramer detests being used, but he detests more being deprived of credit. "He will come." So I called him. The inspector growled enough to peel paint, but when I mentioned Ambrose Sykes, letters, and a parlor candle, he grunted something unprintable and promised to be there. The rest of the day we set the stage. Fritz grumbled about extra chairs, but he set them. I moved the desk lamp aside so the candle could sit in plain sight. Wolfe arranged himself in his chair like a man preparing to preside at judgment. I handled the logistics and tried not to imagine what would happen if Ames lit the thing, and it exploded. At 10 minutes to 4, the first arrival was Ethan Rook. He looked like he hadn't slept, hadn't shaved, and hadn't said no to a bottle. His eyes were too bright, his suit wrinkled. "I had to come," he said. "But if this is some stunt, I'll regret it." "It's a stunt with chairs," I told him. "Sit and don't twitch too much." Next came Dr. Ames, carrying another wooden box like a priest with relics. He greeted Wolfe with the earnestness of a man who has convinced himself he serves science even while running a side business in hokum. "I'm glad you're open to demonstration," he said. "Skepticism is healthy. Observation dispels it." Sykes and Dell arrived together at the stroke of 4, punctual like men who want the record to note it. Kever followed them, impassive, hands folded. Finally, at 4:05, Inspector Kramer entered without ceremony, dropped into a chair and announced, "All right, Wolfe, what circus am I wasting my afternoon on?" Wolfe didn't rise. "The circus, Inspector, is what Mr. Sykes and Dr. Ames contrived 2 nights ago. We shall see whether its animals perform again." Ames set the candle in the middle of the desk, produced a lighter, and asked if he should begin. Wolfe nodded. The wick caught easily, producing a tall flame that wavered but did not consume. The room settled into silence, the kind that makes you notice every breath. Wolfe's eyes moved slowly from face to face. Ethan stared at the candle as if it accused him. Sykes leaned back, lips curved, playing host. Dell watched Wolfe with lawyerly suspicion. Ames watched his flame with paternal pride. Kever stood behind Sykes's chair, hands folded, eyes forward. For a full minute, nothing happened. Then Wolfe said, "Archie, note. Dr. Ames's wick glows but does not blacken. The wax does not melt. Therefore, it is treated. A fraud." "Yes?" Ames flushed. "It is a tool of psychology, a harmless device to encourage trust." "Harmless," Wolfe said. "A crime was committed under its cover. Theft thrives in distraction." Kramer grunted. "Are we going to sit staring at candles until dinner?" "Patience," Wolfe said. "Now, Miss Vance." She stepped forward from the corner where she had waited, face pale but steady. "That night my portfolio was here, beside me." She indicated the space near the screen we'd set up. "When the candle was lit, I thought no one would dare. I was wrong." Wolfe said, "Observe, Inspector. Mr. Sykes, Mr. Dell, Mr. Rook, Dr. Ames, Mr. Kever, the candle claims they are bound by light. But watch." He leaned forward slightly, eyes opening to slits. "Mr. Rook, your hands twitch. Mr. Dell, your jaw sets. Mr. Ames, your eyes dart to the valise we have placed by the screen. Mr. Kever, your weight shifts twice. Which of you cannot sit still in the presence of a toy?" The silence stretched. Then, deliberately, Wolfe leaned back. "Enough. Extinguish it." I pinched the flame dead with a snuffer. Smoke curled. Ames looked affronted. Sykes looked amused. Kramer looked like he wanted to strangle somebody. Wolfe said, "We will reconvene shortly. Mr. Goodwin will escort our guests to the front room. Inspector, remain, I will explain." Which meant, of course, that the game had begun, and Wolfe was already baiting the trap. Wolfe didn't need a stage whisper to make a plan sound inevitable. When I'd parked the visitors in the front room with enough distance between them to keep anyone from reading a pulse off anyone else's throat, I came back to find Wolfe leaning a fraction toward Kramer, which for Wolfe is the same as grabbing a lapel. He told him, in that patient tone he saves for policemen and fools, that the candle was a decoy and the theft had required choreography, not courage. Kramer grunted that if we were going to run a floor show, he wanted a program and an intermission with cigars. Wolfe flicked a hand. "You will have both if you possess the stamina to remain sentient." He didn't waste more on Kramer. He jerked his chin at the silver-based doctor. Ames had set on the blotter. "Archie, underneath." I lifted it. If you've handled as many props as I have while working for a man who collects human foibles like other men collect stamps, you learn to check the backs and the undersides. The bottom was felted, neat, generous with its dignity. The felt, though, had a clean crescent shaved out that didn't belong, as if someone with a steady hand and a dull conscience had trimmed a channel. The metal under the felt showed a thin slot no wider than a pencil line. Beside it, fused to the metal, was a stain you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for sins in moonlight. Resin, clear, almost the texture of old honey. I slid a thumbnail into the slot. Something gave a reluctant whisper. There was no device in sight, no spring to pop a rabbit, but there was the ghost of one. Residue, a few almost invisible crumbs, and in the corner a thread so fine I had to lift it with the point of my pen. Monofilament. Fishing line for people who prefer their fishing indoors. I laid it on Wolfe's blotter. Kramer leaned forward and grunted again, this time with more interest and less disdain. "What am I seeing?" "A means," Wolfe said. "A thin line tied to a latch, the other end routed through a slot and around a base, so that a man who lectures on trust can, with a pious finger at his flame, flick and lift a catch while everyone watches his toy." His mouth turned. "A Judas candle. That's a trick you could teach a Boy Scout," I said. "And a lawyer." "Don't embroider," Wolfe told me. The candle was placed last. The valise was set beside the screen. In the dimness, Mr. Ames requested a thread could be fastened to a clasp. The body sits. The lecture begins. At an appointed moment, a pull, and the catch loosens. Then an emotion, a servant bending, a host stooping to adjust a rug, finishes what the trick began. Miss Vance told us the butler delayed at the bell. I suspect he was not idle. Kramer blew air at his mustache like it offended him by existing. "You don't know that line was on there Sunday." "I know men," Wolfe said, "and I know the odor of contrivance, but if it comforts you, we will confirm. We will see what their hands do when given a chance to repeat themselves." His eyes slid to me. "Archie, as you escorted them, did anyone stray?" "Dell asked for the washroom," I said. I told him where it was and waited where I could see his shoes. He didn't detour into the office. Sykes kept to the furniture like furniture, has stock options. Ames stroked his box like it purrs. Ethan sat and made eyes at the floorboards. Kever looked at nothing and saw everything. Wolfe considered that, then said, "Good. We will supply them with a new chance to be themselves." He reached toward the desk bell, thought better of it, and told me to fetch Fritz without insulting him with the bell. I did. Fritz arrived with a look that said he was not built for matinees. "Fritz," Wolfe said, "bring a tray and glasses. Water for our guests. Coffee for Inspector Kramer. No beer." That was for himself, and he meant it as proof that civilization holds together even under provocation. "Then remain near the hall. No one is to wander. If someone asks, you are lost and must fetch Archie." Fritz nodded solemnly, like a man entrusted with the keys to the Louvre. Before he could go, he hesitated. His orderliness extends beyond knives and soufflés. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "the little jar of cinnamon on the spice shelf? I leave it always between cumin and cloves because the English alphabet is barbarous but serviceable. It is now one jar to the left. I do not mistake." I almost told him I didn't think this case hinged on pastry, then saw Wolfe's eyes click my way and kept my mouth good and quiet. "Who touched it?" I asked. "Someone with cologne that thinks too much of itself," Fritz said, "and the smallest black dust on the rim. I cleaned it. I'm sorry." "Don't be," Wolfe said. "We live among men who touch what is not theirs." He waved Fritz away and looked back at me. A man who powders his fingers will be foolish enough to leave his powder somewhere. Graphite is the usual choice. Mr. Dell is meticulous. Mr. Sykes is fastidious. Dr. Ames is a sentimentalist about symbolism, not residue. Mr. Kever is practical. He let the list sit. We will not guess, we will ask. I went to get them. In the front room, Sykes was narrating to Ethan a version of generosity so polished you could shave in it. Ethan said nothing, his fingers worrying a seam on his knee. Ames had his box on his lap and was touching its lid like a rosary. Dell was on the phone with his eyebrows, drafting objections in advance. Kever had found a piece of wool and domesticated it. We shepherded them back into the office. Fritz came with the tray as if he had been born to carry water to stubborn men. I set the valise by the same screen, placed the candle base where Ames could reach it but not caress it into confessing, and took my usual position where my eyes could map the room without anyone noticing they were being surveyed like coastline. Wolfe didn't bother with speeches. "Dr. Ames," he said, "light your conscience." Ames bristled. "It is not a conscience, Mr. Wolfe. It is a device to concentrate intention." But he lit it, and there we were again, watching the reliable flame do its reliable party trick. The wick bright, the wax changeless. "Mr. Sykes," Wolfe murmured, "since you believe in symbols, indulge me a literalism. Ask your man for a handkerchief. Place it on the floor by the screen and pick it up." Slowly. Sykes's eyes flashed annoyance, then calculation. He turned his head a fraction. "Kever." Kever produced a square of linen from nowhere and crouched with a smoothness that took the strain out of gravity. He set the handkerchief down by the screen. His hand passed near the valise clasp and did not touch. He straightened and dusted nothing from his fingers. "Again," Wolfe said. He said it softly, but it was not a suggestion. "Closer to the clasp." Kever did as asked. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at anyone. His eyes stayed on the rectangle of linen and the floor around it, as if the only world was 3 feet of Persian rug and a seam of baseboard. His hand went close enough that I could have sworn I saw the latch twitch. I put both hands in my pockets because it is unseemly to leap in a man's office unless something is on fire. Ames watched his flame with anxious piety. Dell watched Wolfe the way a man watches a tiger from inside a car, counting metal as luck. Ethan was white around the mouth. Sykes was still arrogant and at ease, the way men are when they've rehearsed indignation and enjoy it. "Enough," Wolfe said, and I snuffed the flame. Smoke unwound like a question. Kramer had been quiet long enough to build steam. He blew it now. "If this is your demonstration, it demonstrates that a houseman can pick up a cloth without knocking a woman's bag." Whoopee. Wolfe made a sound you wouldn't call a laugh, but you couldn't call safe either. "Inspector, you have as much patience as a horse at a picnic. We are not done." He turned to Ames. "Dr. Ames, leave the base with me." Ames clutched the box. "That is my property." "It is evidence," Wolfe said. "I am done pretending otherwise. Mr. Kramer will take custody if that trembles your sensibilities." Kramer's eyebrows climbed like mountaineers smelling coffee. He pulled a handkerchief, lifted the base with his fingertips, and peered at its undersides like he expected it to bite him. "What am I looking for?" "Here," I said, and showed him the slot, the tacky patch, the ghost of line. He squinted, then grunted, which in his language is acceptance with reservations. He slid it into an envelope he'd brought on principle. Sykes unfolded himself an inch. "This is absurd. You invite us, insult us, confiscate a teaching aid." "A teaching aid," Wolfe said, "that taught a thief that people prefer to watch a flame than a hand." I am not finished. He shifted his bulk a half-inch, which is a paragraph for his body. "Mr. Dell, you asked to use my lavatory a few minutes ago. Before that, you asked to retrieve this base last night. Today, you will produce the tin of powder you used to educate your fingers, or you will let Inspector Kramer educate you." Dell's composure had the sort of engineering you see in bridges and lies. He looked at me, then at Kramer, then at Wolfe. He arranged his face into innocent affront and did not answer, which was as good as a confession, but not as useful. Kramer leaned forward, delighted to have something to lean into. Hand it over. Dell lifted a palm like a man who has stopped bullets with gestures. If my fingers are dry, it is because I am not a fool. Any powder you think you saw exists only in Mr. Wolfe's appetite for drama. It exists, Fritz said from the doorway, voice smooth as sauce. He was holding a small stainless steel ramekin with a lid. One of his mise en place said he treats like children. On the lid, faint black dust made a smudge like the touch of a moth. This was on the hall table. My ramekins are not a public convenience. Dell started to speak. Kever said, "Sir," in the tone that means, "Wait." Sykes looked like a man who has walked into a draft and won't admit it's cold. Ames shifted his weight like he'd discovered legs. Ethan closed his eyes for a beat. Wolfe said, "Inspector?" Kramer didn't bother with niceties. He took the ramekin in one hand and Dell's pocket with the other. Dell tried to lift his shoulders into something that resembled dignity and produced, finally, a small paper envelope folded tight, the kind jewelers use for screws or sins. Kramer shook a few grains into his palm. Graphite, if my eyes aren't liars. His grin said they weren't. "This is preposterous," Dell said. "Shut up," Kramer told him pleasantly, which is a miracle of diction. He looked at Wolfe. "So your candle gave us a string, and your cook gave us the dust, and now what?" Wolfe let the quiet swell again. He can make his silence feel like a tide rising. "Now we observe the reactions of men to the removal of their shield," he said, and his gaze traveled from Sykes to Ames to Kever and back, slow as the hand of a clock that has somewhere to be. "One of you used Dr. Ames's contrivance to dislodge a clasp while Miss Vance attended to your sermon. Another stooped and finished the work. A third arranged delay and cover. Mr. Dell, you prepared to trespass further today. On my safe, perhaps. On my forbearance, certainly. You powder your fingers like a child at Halloween." Sykes's smile had finally begun to fade at the edges. "You cannot speak to my counsel that way." "I'm not speaking to him," Wolfe said. "I'm speaking to you." He took a breath. Not big, but considered. "You will bring the letters here, now, or we will proceed to an uglier, noisier method. I am, for once, in the mood for noise." I'd seen Wolfe angry before. It doesn't raise his voice so much as gather it. The brownstones seemed to feel it and lean in. In the front room, a chair creaked like a man reconsidering his weight. The candle, dead on the blotter, managed to look offended. In the hallway, Fritz did not breathe. Sykes measured the room like he'd weigh it and buy it at auction. He turned not to Wolfe or Kramer, but to Kever. It was the smallest flick of eyes I've seen, meaning more than a page of contracts. Kever's head dipped a fraction in answer. Then Kever said, "Sir," and something that wasn't exactly a request passed between them. "No," Wolfe said, and the word was a wall. "Not in my house." That did it. The air snapped. Ethan, who had been a statue with nerves, spoke for the first time since he came in. He said, "For God's sake, Ambrose," and stood up too fast, knocking his knee on the table edge, hard enough to make coffee slop in Kramer's cup. He looked sick, young, and furious at once. "He made Kever take them. You made Kever take them. You said it was for the trust. You said they'd ruin me if Eleanor controlled them. You—" Dell was on his feet with a hand up as if there were a judge to impress. "Ethan," he said, the name a warning and a hush and a leash. Kramer stood too, big as a door in a storm. "Everybody stay right where you are." We all did, and for once it wasn't because Wolfe told us to. He didn't need to. The room had reached the place where momentum takes its own notes. Wolfe merely closed his eyes as if pained by the banality of human technique and opened them again with his mind made up. "We have our pressure," he said. Now we will have our proof. It takes a particular kind of silence to hold 6 people in one room like threads pulled taut. That was the silence we had after Ethan's outburst. He stood, pale and trembling, looking at Sykes as if he'd only just recognized the devil in daylight. Sykes, for his part, wore a calm that was too deliberate to be anything but rehearsed. Dell's hand hovered like a conductor ready to wave away discord. Ames fussed with his box as though it might deliver him from awkwardness. Kever was still as stone, his eyes lowered, waiting for orders he already knew were spent. Kramer cut the silence the way only a cop can, loud enough to remind everyone who had the badge. "All right, Rook, sit down. Nobody moves till I say." He planted himself square, his jaw working on the taste of victory he wasn't ready to swallow. Ethan dropped back into his chair but couldn't stay still, his fingers knotting in his lap. He'd given away too much, and we all knew it. Wolfe's eyes were half-lidded, but that didn't mean they were closed. He was storing everything, the timing of Ethan's outburst, the flick of Sykes's glance at Kever, Dell's powder, Ames's silence. All pieces, all slotted somewhere in that vault of his head. Wolfe finally spoke, his voice quiet but as deliberate as a gavel. "Mr. Rook, you accuse. You say Mr. Sykes compelled Kever to steal the letters. That claim must be tested, or it remains a boy's panic." He shifted slightly, not to Sykes, but to Kever. "And you, sir, are the fulcrum. Did you take them?" Kever lifted his eyes. They were steady, resigned, but not without pride. "Yes." The word dropped and echoed. Ethan inhaled sharp. Dell jerked, about to object, but Kramer's hand went up like a stop sign. Ames blinked, then stared at the candle as if it had betrayed him too. "Yes," Kever repeated, voice even. "At Mr. Sykes's instruction. He told me where the lady's case was. He told me to wait for the signal. When Dr. Ames dimmed the lamps, I stooped as if to adjust the carpet and lifted the papers. I delivered them to Mr. Sykes after the meeting. That is the truth." Sykes didn't flinch, but his eyes hardened, just for a beat, before he smoothed them back into the old confident gloss. "Loyalty can be misinterpreted," he said silkily. "My man mistakes discretion for theft. I asked him to secure property that belonged to the trust. Miss Vance brought sensitive documents without clearance. I acted as custodian." "Custodian," Ethan barked, half rising again. "You told me it was protection, that you'd keep them so Eleanor couldn't—" "Sit down," Kramer roared, and Ethan wilted back. Wolfe sighed, a sound of monumental distaste. "Custodian, Mr. Sykes. You pervert language. The letters were Miss Vance's possession. They were her trust to bear, not yours to appropriate. You staged a ceremony of honesty to mask deceit. You commissioned Dr. Ames's bauble. You set his rhetoric as screen. You arranged the butler's delay, and you tasked him to stoop. The plan is graceless, but effective." He opened his eyes fully now, and it was not a friendly sight. "And you hoped that should suspicion fall, it would fall on a servant who could be dismissed, or a young man whose reputation is fragile." Sykes's smile returned, thinner. "Fine words, Mr. Wolfe. But words. You cannot prove a thing." "I have the candlestick with its slot and residue," Wolfe said. "I have Mr. Dell's powder, meant to assist in some surreptitious venture upon my own property. I have Mr. Kever's confession, clear and uncoerced. And I have your protégé's panic, which is eloquence itself. That suffices." "It does not suffice for court," Dell said quickly, voice clipped. "Pooh," Wolfe snapped. "Court is Inspector Kramer's pasture. I graze only for truth. Inspector, you have what you require. Charge them." Kramer looked at Kever first, then Sykes. His face was redder than usual, half triumph, half caution. "If I walk out with just this, a good lawyer will chew me to gristle. Confession or not, unless I have those letters in my hand, the DA will treat it like a parlor tale." Wolfe inclined his head a fraction. "Then let us have the letters. Mr. Sykes will yield them. He's not a fool. He knows the game has ended. Sykes's calm cracked now, though only in the eyes. His voice was still silk, but it dragged over stone. I do not have them. Lies, Ethan burst, out, unable to hold. You said, enough, Wolfe cut him. He turned to Sykes. Produce them. I cannot. They are not here. They are not in this house, certainly, Wolfe said, but you retain them. Or Dell does, or Kever was instructed to pass them further. Mr. Goodwin, fetch Mr. Panzer. I didn't need telling twice. Saul had been waiting across the street as arranged. I brought him in, quiet as a shadow, and Wolfe briefed him in 2 sentences. You will accompany Mr. Kever to Mr. Sykes's residence. He will show you where he placed the letters. Inspector Kramer will attend. Mr. Sykes may join if he wishes to save face. That shook Sykes. For the first time, he shifted in his chair like the fabric didn't fit. Dell started to object, but Wolfe silenced him with one word. Pfui. Kramer stood, buttoning his coat with relish. Let's go. Kever, you're riding with me, and if you try to slip, I'll have you hogtied. Kever bowed his head, not ashamed, not defiant, just steady. I will show you. Sykes rose too, smooth as oil. If you insist, I have nothing to fear. You will see. They moved to the door, Ames trailing, clutching his box like a child with a toy, Ethan following with steps that stumbled between dread and relief. Dell brought up the rear, his jaw tight, his eyes darting like a man calculating who would pay his bill now. When they were gone, the office felt suddenly huge in its quiet. Wolfe exhaled through his nose, deep and long, and reached for his beer at last. Fritz appeared as if summoned by that sigh, with a glass already poured. I leaned against the desk, watching Wolfe take the first sip like a priest performing the mass. So we wait? I asked. We wait, he said, though the conclusion is foregone. Kever will deliver. Sykes will bluster. Dell will scribble. Ames will dissemble, and Mr. Rook. Wolfe shook his head. He may yet redeem himself, though I doubt it. Why doubt? I asked. Because his panic was not only fear of ruin. It was guilt for having dallied with compromise. He wanted Sykes's favor, and so he allowed Sykes to persuade him that theft was for his benefit. That is a taint not easily scrubbed. Wolfe closed his eyes. Miss Vance must decide whether to forgive him. I do not advise it. We waited an hour. The brownstone settled around us like it always does when strangers leave, sighing back into its solitude. Then the phone rang. I snatched it. It was Kramer. His voice was hoarse, but it carried the weight of a man who has bagged his quarry. We've got them. Letters in Sykes's wall safe, exactly where Kever said. Rook's name all over the envelopes. Your fat genius wins again. I'll be by tomorrow to take your statement. Tonight I've got a fish to fry. He hung up without waiting for Wolfe's reply. I relayed the news. Wolfe grunted, finished his beer, and finally picked up the book he'd abandoned yesterday, as if betrayal and theatrics were interruptions no worse than a draft. Dinner will be prompt, he said. That was all. But I could still feel the echo of that candle in the safe, the way its flame had held everyone's eyes while hands worked mischief in the dark. It wasn't the first time I'd seen Wolfe prove that crime is usually just vanity with props, and it wouldn't be the last. Dinner that night went off like a ceasefire, civilized on the plate, loaded under the table. Wolfe ate with the serenity of a man who had put the world in a drawer and turned the key. I had questions limbering up, but experience has taught me that when Wolfe eats in silence after a day like that, the smart move is to let the machine cool. After coffee, he read half a page and slept the kind of sleep a bank vault does, heavy, unembarrassed, immune to drafts. Morning arrived honest and bright. At 9, the orchids got their audience. At 10, Kramer got ours. He came in with a manila envelope tucked under his arm like it had ticked once and might again. Miss Vance arrived behind him, composed as if sleep had cooperated. Kramer set the envelope on Wolfe's desk with the air of a man who has brought a roast to a critic. "Letters," he said. "Wall safe in Sykes's study. Kever knew the combination. Says his boss isn't inventive. We bagged them, dusted, found enough prints to wallpaper a courtroom. Chain of custody's clean. If you were planning to say I couldn't find my backside with both hands, save it for lunch." He sat, fished a cigar out of his pocket, looked at Fritz's door, and put it back like he'd remembered living things. Wolfe took his time. He always takes his time when someone else is anxious. He adjusted the blotter, squared the envelope, and regarded Miss Vance. "You understand, madam, that these will reside with the police." "I only want to see that they're intact," she said. "If they are, I can live with custody." Kramer passed me a pair of cotton gloves. I put them on and opened the envelope. The smell came first. Paper and a faint ghost of cedar from Sykes's safe. People who like to cheat also like to think their crimes smell nice. I laid the letters out, one by one. Alden Farrow's hand slanting neat and dry, the way men write when they have trained their emotion to march in step. Dates in December, a last one in the second week of January, 2 weeks before he died. Names: Ethan Rook, Miss Vance, the trust, a list of paintings he thought should be kept out of Sykes's hands. For now, until the board is less susceptible to flattery. You don't need a magnifying glass to read flattery as a disease. Wolfe read, lips barely moving. He had his forefinger on the last page in a way that made me look there before he told me to, which is one of his tricks. Make you think you thought of it yourself. "Miss Vance," he said. "The final letter." She leaned in. "That's it. January 12th. He said he'd written a more forceful version and torn it up. He regretted the tone. He worried it would hurt Ethan." Wolfe didn't answer. He tapped the margin, then the crease at the fold, then the watermark where the paper caught light. "Archie." I knew the routine. I tilted the sheet shallow to the lamp. Paper tells stories when you don't look it in the eye. The watermark matched the others. The fold didn't. The cross crease was 2 millimeters off the pattern in the December letters. If Farrow had kept his stationery in a box, and men like him do, the stack would crease in the same place. This one had lived somewhere else. And across the white at the bottom, faint as a ghost and running the width, was the indentation of letters that didn't belong to this text. If you've spent enough time watching crooks write apologies, you know the feel of a page that's been written on top of this one. Wolfe's mouth made the smallest agreeable shape. "Pencil, Archie. Software make our trespass visible." I slid a sheet of carbon under, took a 2B from the drawer, and shaded gentle. "The trick isn't pressing, it's patience." The ghosts came up out of the paper like fish rising. Too risky. Delay board vote. If Rook balks, use Rook. The rest smudged where the pen had dug harder, and then nothing. The indent faded like a conscience. Miss Vance made a sound that had edge. "He said he tore the stronger draft. He didn't." "No," Wolfe said. "Someone wrote a note atop this page. The hand is not Mr. Farrow's. It is a list of tactics. It instructed someone to use Rook." The last 2 words read. The rest is mangled. "Mr. Sykes is not merely acquisitive. He's a planner." Kramer's face turned a deeper shade. "Jesus. So the letters weren't just insurance. They were a plan." "Part of one," Wolfe said. "This last sheet is not the last sheet Mr. Farrow sent. It is a substituted last page, meant to soften the rest and to blend. As you see, the watermark fools the eye. The real last page, if it exists, carries sharper accusations or instructions that would have aided Miss Vance and injured Mr. Sykes. He kept it. He intended to release only what suited him, when it suited him, with interpretive commentary. He looked at Miss Vance. "Thus your betrayal ripens. Theft to obtain, exchange to alter, publicity to weaponize. Kramer rubbed his brow like it needed erasing. All right, fat man, you've got your mystery dessert. Can I charge him for the switch? You can if you find the missing page, Wolfe said. And you will if you search like a man who has been laughed at before. He is vain. Vain men keep trophies where they can see them. Kramer grunted that he didn't need homilies to do his job. He stood to go do it anyway. Before he left, he hesitated. Ames is squawking to my office that you stole his apparatus. I surrendered the base to you, Wolfe said. If he wants his toy, he may seek it at the property clerk's desk. He will find conversation less mystical there. When Kramer had gone, Miss Vance sat very still, looking at the raised ghosts on the page like they were the writing above graves. You were right, she said. He never intended to destroy Ethan. He intended to own him. Wolfe's eyelids drooped. Ownership is dear to Mr. Sykes. He hungers for it the way some men hunger for pheasant. He shifted his gaze to me. Mr. Panzer? Downstairs, I said. He called while you were being horticultural. He's learned our candle story has footnotes. Fetch him, Wolfe said. Saul came in with a thin smile and a page torn from a notebook. Our prop maker in Brooklyn remembers Ames like you remember the first man who stiffed you. Distinctly. One order for 12 reliability candles last fall, exactly as I told you. 2 weeks ago, a second order for 2 bases with a custom slot and an interior spool. He says Ames specified monofilament and asked for smooth pull, no bite. Saul arched a brow at the page on the desk. You found the slot? We did, I said. And the bite? Saul nodded. Also, a good doctor went to see Mr. Sykes yesterday morning before coming here. They had 40 minutes alone. The doorman says the doctor left carrying nothing he hadn't brought. He let that sit. Saul enjoys inference the way cats enjoy mice. Miss Vance took it without flinching. Ames will say he believed in the ritual and didn't know there was a theft. And you, Wolfe said, will not waste breath arguing with a man who has made a profession of arguing people into trusting him. He lifted a finger like a conductor bringing in woodwinds. Now, Mr. Goodwin, Mr. Parker at the Gazette, inform him that Mr. Sykes's ritual of reliability has charred his own fingers. Tell him the police recovered letters from Mr. Sykes's wall safe. Offer no quotes, and then call the chair of your trust's board, Miss Vance. Her head came up. Mrs. Calder, she abhors scandal. She abhors it most when she's the last to hear of it, Wolfe said dryly. Invite her here at 5. She will bring 2 other trustees. She cannot help herself. Mr. Sykes will learn of it. Mr. Parker will see to that, and he will attend to impose his version. Dr. Ames will come to justify his role. Mr. Dell will come to protect his retainer. We will give them a stage and deprive them of props. You propose another gathering, she said, the corners of her mouth not quite a smile. In your office. In mine, Wolfe said, where no one stoops unobserved. He turned to me. Fritz's cinnamon. I blinked. We're seasoning the guests? He favored me with a look he keeps for when I earn it. The jar was moved and bore trace of graphite. A man who could not fetch his own powder sought substitute. He handled our spice and left his stain. Mr. Dell was dusted when he came last night. His fingers marked Fritz's ramekin. The cologne, he inhaled faintly, as if memory carried smell, was not Mr. Sykes's. It was Mr. Dell's. A cheap exuberance. I mention this because it affirms that Mr. Dell did not intend only to posture. He intended enterprise. He aimed his eyes at the safe. He would have tried for the candle had we let him linger. I gave him the point. So the trespass in the kitchen wasn't about soufflé, it was rehearsal. It was habit, Wolfe said. Men practice on whatever is near. Miss Vance's mouth tightened. I will call Mrs. Calder. She used our phone with the tone of a woman who has spent a life saying things once. She invited the board chair politely, said only that evidence had changed hands and that I would prefer to explain the rest in person. She received all the questions without answering any, which is an art. When she hung up, she said, "They'll be here at 5:15. I could not keep them from bringing Mr. Lennox. He oversees audit." Wolfe did not mind. He never minds witnesses he has not selected as long as they sit where he puts them. He looked at the clock. "We have hours. Archie, telephone Mr. Kramer and advise him that my office will be a menagerie at 5. He will pretend to resent it and come. Then call Doctor Ames. Inform him that his reputation requires him to demonstrate his candle for trustees who are concerned about mysticism in governance." "Make it sound like a compliment," I asked. "It is," Wolfe said, to his vanity. I made the calls. Kramer told me if I turned his precinct into a subscription service, he'd send me an invoice. Translation, he'd be there. Ames, when he heard trustees and misunderstanding, warmed like a radiator. He regretted any confusion and would be honored to clarify, etc. And could he bring a fresh candle? His last had been impounded by a misguided zeal for evidence. I told him to bring his best flame. He laughed, sincere in the way a seal is when you clap. At 3, Saul came back with one more candy for Wolfe's jar. "Sykes called a reporter at the Banner," he said. "Fed him a line about safeguarding the reputation of a deceased friend from a staff member acting beyond remit. The piece will be thin, but not flattering. Also, Dell visited Ames for 20 minutes. No one else went in or out." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "The doctor writes his lines." "Maybe rehearse his hand movements," I said. "Possibly," Wolfe allowed. "But he will err. Men do when they believe their story is stronger than the facts." By 4, the brownstone had that expectant hush again. Fritz took it personally and polished every surface that would sit still. I moved chairs, checked sight lines, put the safe key where it would not be found by ambition with graphite on its fingers, and brought out the candle Miss Vance had delivered that first night. I set it on a side table where it could be seen but not touched. "You're keeping that in the open?" I asked. "Bait," Wolfe said. "Dr. Ames will glance. Mr. Dell will yearn. Mr. Sykes will remember what he cannot control." At 5:15 on the nose, when the room was ready and Wolfe had finished his beer without savoring it, always a sign of weather, the bell rang. The delegation came in twos. Mrs. Calder, white hair like snow that had made peace with itself, and Mr. Lennox, narrow as a column of figures. Behind them Sykes and Dell bringing in their weather. Behind them Dr. Ames with his box and a smile built for Sunday school. Last, Kramer, not invited, but inevitable. Ethan didn't come. Miss Vance had asked him not to. Kever was nowhere, which was all right for the moment. He had done his part and would do more when the wheels turned loud. We placed them. Sykes tried to set the geometry, and Wolfe let him, up to the edge of the rug. Mrs. Calder demanded plain answers in a voice that would have carried over artillery. Wolfe inclined his head and offered her a seat just to his left, the place of advantage in his office. She took it without suspecting what he'd given her. Ames stood with his box, poised to perform. Dell kept his hands neat and empty. Kramer found his corner and made it official by existing in it. "Ladies and gentlemen," Wolfe said, and the room dropped 2 degrees as it set to his pitch. "We are here to discuss a light that did not burn and a man who did." He nodded to Ames. "You will do your trick once more, then I will do mine." Dr. Ames set his wooden box on Wolfe's desk like a minister laying down scripture and took out a fresh silver base and an ivory stick that had the same prim posture as the one we'd sniffed already. He asked if we would prefer the lights lowered to let the integrity of the flame be visible. Mrs. Calder, who had the carriage of a woman who'd stared down many committees and not lost one, said, "We prefer integrity whether we can see the flame or not." Ames smiled like he'd been paid in advance and struck his lighter. The wick caught and stood up tall, bright and, if you didn't know better, honest. People's eyes went there as eyes do. Sykes leaned back with his old televised composure, one arm draped across the chair like he meant to own it by osmosis. Dell sat tidy, hands folded, jaw locked. Mr. Lennox from Audit watched the base the way a banker watches a man counting his cash, without blinking. Miss Vance's gaze flicked to me in a way. She doesn't grip, but she takes a bearing. Kramer, planted in the corner, looked like a bailiff in an opera who doesn't sing but ends the show. Wolfe's eyelids dropped. That usually means his head is turning faster than the second hand. "Dr. Ames," he said, "recite your catechism briefly. Men of affairs have little patience for homilies." Ames took it in good humor. "Trust is a group. Posture," he began, palms open, voice tuned for seminar rooms. "When we act together, we require a shared—" "Thank you," Wolfe said, and it was not thanks. "Now, Mr. Goodwin." I had a 3-foot length of monofilament in my pocket. I took the valise we'd set to one side, the twin of Miss Vance's, and fastened the line to the latch, where the hinge pin makes a convenient fool of itself. I routed the line around the leg of the desk and laid its end along the edge where Wolfe's hand could find it without ceremony. Ames kept talking. It didn't matter what he said. The candle did what it does. It soaked up attention like a sponge. "Inspector," Wolfe murmured, "observe." His thumb and forefinger closed, the tiniest movement, and drew. The clasp sighed and let go like a man who finds a better story to tell. The valise mouth eased. No one had touched it but a line tied before their eyes. Mrs. Calder made a small sound that would have melted a boardroom. Lennox leaned closer without moving his shoes. Kramer's mustache curled in a direction that isn't in barbering manuals. "Harmless," Wolfe said, and let the word hang. "A harmless device," Dr. Ames says. "It is indeed harmless for men who can keep their hands from what is not theirs." Ames's smile had thinned. "Mr. Wolfe, this is not what I—" "It is exactly," Wolfe said. "What you sell, distraction by right. You ordered a dozen such candles last fall, and 2 bases with slots and spools 2 weeks ago. Your prop maker remembers you fondly. Do not pretend this is an unblemished sacrament." Ames swallowed. "The slot is to permit air." "Pooh," Wolfe said mildly. He turned without turning to the trustees. "You see the method. Now the use. Inspector Kramer recovered letters last night from Mr. Sykes's wall safe. They were written by Alden Farrow to Miss Vance. They counsel restraint in acquisitions Mr. Sykes pressed. One page, the last, has been changed. The substitute shows signs of having served as a writing pad for a message that is not Mr. Farrow's. Mr. Goodwin." I had set the selected sheet aside. With the soft pencil and the patience Wolfe pays me for, I brought up the ghosts again, the words rising pale. Too risky. Delay board vote. If rook balks, use rook. The trustees came to their feet by inches, without knowing they had. Mrs. Calder said, "Ambrose?" Sykes did not blink. "This is theater. Those letters were in jeopardy. I secured them. Everything else is inference." "Inspector Kramer will decide about jeopardy," Wolfe said. "But the letters were taken under your roof while your consultant sold reliability. Your butler has confessed to removing them at your signal, and they were found in your safe. Spare us insult." Dell came in, neat and late, as lawyers do when they think timing will soften a blow. "If there was a substitution," he said, "we will need expert testimony from a document. Examiner. This pencil business—" "Will amuse the examiner," Wolfe said, "because it will lead him by the nose to what he already knows. Pressure signatures, stroke angles, fiber deformation. You powder your fingers to handle other people's property. That is your competence. Do not lecture me on paper." He tipped his head, attentive to a memory. "You left graphite on Fritz's ramekin when you were hunting for grit. You moved his cinnamon jar and dusted its rim. Your cologne was indiscreet and unkind to my kitchen. That earned me a quick look from Fritz at the door and a muttered oath in Alsatian I won't translate. Mrs. Calder ignored pastry and went for meat. "Ambrose," she said, and made his name sound like a verdict. "Did you order this man to steal?" Sykes, to his credit or his practice, did not sweat. "I instructed my staff to secure documents in dispute. If anything improper occurred, it was out of zeal. I will not be made the villain because Miss Vance parades private correspondence to impugn a benefactor." "You will be made the villain," Wolfe said pleasantly, "because you are one. But before we tidy that, Doctor, Ames—" There are moments you can feel Wolfe let the hook slack before he snatches. He faced Ames as if offering him an exit he would be grateful to take later in the night. "Doctor, your part in this is ambiguous. Either you contrived an apparatus, knowing it would distract while theft was done, making you an accessory, or you are a credulous man who sells confidence games to people who need pretexts. Choose." Ames's hand, the right, touched the lid of his wooden box 3 times, a little metronome beat. He looked at Mrs. Calder, not at Sykes, and that told me where he thought his next check might come from. My devices are tools. Mr. Sykes asked me to create a more, reliable base. He said his rooms were drafty and the flame faltered. He wanted a demonstration that would not embarrass the guests. I did not participate in any theft. I swear that. I don't steal. "You rented your dignity," Wolfe said, not unkindly. "You will need to buy it back." Kramer had had enough nuance. "All right," he said. "This is charming, but I came for evidence I can lock in a cabinet. Either of you two, Sykes, Dell, cough up the missing page now, and we can all get home before my wife tells me what I already am." "Missing page," Dell repeated, a half-second too slow. "What missing page?" "The real last sheet of Mr. Farrow's last letter," Wolfe said. "The one that didn't make it into Mr. Sykes's wall safe because he preferred a softer tone. The one that says plainly what the indented note suggested." He let his gaze move to the thing in the room that had been asking to be looked at since it arrived, the wooden box under Ames's hand. "Doctor." "Ames." "Lay your box on the desk." Ames blinked. There's nothing." "Lay it down," Kramer said, and you would have thought it weighed a piano the way Ames's fingers resisted letting go. He put it where Wolfe indicated. The box was well made, brass corners, a velvet bed a candle could nap on between sermons. Wolfe did not touch it. He doesn't touch more than he must. He glanced at me. I took my pocket knife, slid the thinnest blade under the velvet, and lifted. Glue yields to curiosity. The lining came up clean, revealing wood, and under the wood a space as thin as a lie. In the space, folded twice and slim as thrift, was paper. I used the knife as a finger and raised it. Kramer was already there with an evidence envelope. He slid the sheet in like he loved it. "Oh," Dr. Ames said. It wasn't a word. It was a sound men make when the floor has the impertinence to be further down than it was a moment before. Sykes didn't move. He'd rehearsed not moving. Dell wet his lips. Mrs. Calder's hands, knuckled and steady, settled together in her lap like she was blessing something hateful. Kramer looked at me. "Gloves," he said, and I had them out and on before the last vowel fell. He passed me the envelope. I eased the folds open to the edge, enough to see the hand. It was Farrow's. Anyone who has read a man in his own ink knows when he's speaking. Wolfe's chin dipped a hair. He doesn't do victory laps. They scuff rugs. "Read," Mrs. Calder said. It wasn't a request. If Mr. Farrow wrote something for his trustees, let us hear him. "Not yet," Kramer said, duty getting the better of curiosity for once. "Chain first." He sealed, signed, and pocketed the envelope like a man tucking in an heirloom. "We'll do this in my house with the clerk watching and nobody's thumbs where they don't belong." Sykes finally found a sentence. This is extortion. That item belongs to Dr. Ames. It belongs to the state of New York for the afternoon, Kramer said. You can borrow it in court. Ames got his voice up out of his shoes. I didn't put it there. I swear to you, I didn't. Mr. Sykes, he asked me to. He said the board might misunderstand the ritual, that he wanted to present it with context. He asked if he could keep some materials safe from hysteria. I thought it was only for a day. Hysteria, Mrs. Calder repeated, each syllable cooled on an anvil. We women are susceptible. Ames colored. That isn't. You meant what you were paid to mean, Wolfe said. He turned his head to the trustees without shifting the rest of him. Madame, gentlemen, you have seen the method, the theft, the tampering, and the concealment. The rest is consequence. If you were to ask me for advice, and you will not, I would suggest removal, audit, and an apology to Miss Vance, in that order. Sykes laughed then, a quiet sound that showed his teeth without warmth. And you, Mr. Wolfe, what is your appetite today? We all have one. You have made a fine show. Do you want a donation? To orchids, perhaps? It was unwise and beautiful, the way stepping on a rake is beautiful to spectators. Wolfe's eyes opened fully, which is an event with its own weather. Sir, he said, and it was the tone he saves for last. I am not a plate on your sideboard. You cannot fill me and hope I glisten for your guests. He turned to Kramer. You have enough, Inspector, to keep you busy. When you are done weighing, we will finish measuring. He looked to Mrs. Calder. If you do not wish to hear the rest of Mr. Farrow's letter here, you may hear it in Kramer's office. But you will hear it, and when you do, you will learn that Mr. Farrow did not fear scandal. He feared flattery sold as stewardship. We will hear it, she said. Today. Good, Wolfe said, and let his eyelids go back down. Archie, see our guests out. Dr. Ames may leave his toy. Ames, abashed, set the candle and based down with the air of a man, donating his dignity to a rummage sale. Dell tried to collect it with his eyes. Kramer collected Dell with his gaze and reminded him he had pockets enough already. Sykes paused at the threshold, long enough to give me the look men give when they're memorizing a face for later. I gave it back to him. My face holds up fine. When the door shut on the last of them and the brownstone inhaled once, as it always does after a parade, Wolfe exhaled through his nose, slow and even. We are now rid, he said, of liturgy. And not yet of bluster, I said. There will be more, he allowed. But the page will speak. Paper is less adroit than men at lying. Dinner in peace? I asked. Not yet, he said. Not until I have told Miss Vance what she already knows and does not want to say aloud. He opened his eyes a sliver and looked at her. You chose Mr. Rook because he is talented and young, and because you like what his talent says about your judgment. You will now choose whether to like him less for what his nerves said about his character. That is your affair. Mine is over presently. She took it, like she has taken worse, with her chin at the angle of resolve and her mouth not asking for kindness. Finish it, she said. I will, he said. Tomorrow, here at 11, when the state has blessed our scrap of truth. He closed his eyes. If you've never watched a big mind rest, it's not sleep, it's storage. I took the hint and went to tell Fritz we would be 2 for dinner and not to light any candles we couldn't explain to a jury. Morning in the brownstone always has a rhythm you could set clocks by, but that morning the air felt heavier, like the walls had absorbed too many words the night before and weren't sure what to do with them. Wolfe came down from the plant rooms at 11 sharp, beard trimmed, shirt starched, and eyes still carrying the kind of irritation that lingers after too much human contact. Miss Vance had arrived, early, waiting with that still poise of hers, though her fingers tapped once against her handbag before she forced them quiet. At 11:20 the bell rang, and Fritz ushered in Kramer, carrying an envelope that looked like it weighed more than paper should. Behind him came Mrs. Calder, Lennox from audit, and trailing but not uninvited. Ethan Rook, pale and hollow-eyed, as if he'd been kept awake all night by ghosts that hadn't finished their monologue. Kramer didn't waste ceremony. He slapped the envelope down on Wolfe's desk. There, the real last page. Farrow's handwriting, ink verified, no substitutions, chain clean. My clerk read it aloud this morning with 2 witnesses present, in case anyone wants to squawk later. We've got enough to hang Sykes in court and Ames beside him if the DA's got the appetite. I'm here so you can say I kept you in the loop, though Lord knows I should have locked the loop before you stuck your nose in it. He sank into a chair like a man who didn't mind being cross, but preferred to be cross on his own terms. Wolfe unfolded the sheet with the delicacy of a man who would scold the wind for creasing it. He read silently, lips tight. Then he handed it to me. I read. Farrow's words were not ambiguous. He warned that Ambrose Sykes had sought to manipulate the trust to his advantage, that Dell was too eager to supply technicalities where candor was required, and that Dr. Ames was a mountebank trading in symbols. And then the line that caught even me. If Rook hesitates to oppose Sykes, remind him that art without integrity is forgery by another name. Use Rook if you must, but use him to resist, not to serve. When I looked up, Ethan was staring at the floor, his lips pressed white. Miss Vance's eyes softened a fraction, not with pity, but with something closer to respect for a man already condemned by his own panic. Wolfe let the silence sit long enough to force everyone to meet it head-on. Then he said, "You see, madam?" "You see, Inspector," Mr. Farrow wrote plainly. The theft was not only of documents, but of intent. Mr. Sykes meant to shape the trust with shadows, to take these words and bend them backward until they accused their own subjects. He planned to weaponize virtue. Mrs. Calder's chin rose a fraction. "Then the board will convene without him. We will vote. He will be removed." Her tone had the weight of iron bars sliding into place. Kramer snorted. "You'll do it quick. If Sykes's lawyer gets a whiff of delay, he'll file motions to make mud of it. But we've got him cold with this." He tapped the envelope with a thick finger. "This page puts him in the chair of intent. The DA likes intent. Intent, Wolfe said, is the marrow of crime." The act itself was clumsy. The page is the scheme. Without it, you might have proved theft. With it, you prove design. He closed his eyes for a beat, then opened them to Ethan. "And you, sir. You were nearly used. You must decide whether that is an excuse or a stain. Farrow believed in your talent. He hoped you would believe in it too." Ethan's voice cracked out of him like a boy whose voice hadn't finished changing. I thought he trusted Sykes. He said Sykes could make things happen. I was stupid enough to think protection was friendship." His hands clenched and opened on his knees. "I didn't take the letters, but I didn't stop it. I didn't even want to see." "No," Wolfe said, and the word carried more weight than condemnation. "But now you do. If you continue to see, perhaps you will paint with eyes as well as hands." He shifted back a fraction, his patience with sentiment measured. "Miss Vance, your loyalty was not misplaced. It was only tested. The letters belong now with the law, but their spirit returns to you." She inclined her head, neither triumphant nor defeated. "That is enough." Kramer cleared his throat. "For the record, Ames is screaming that he's innocent, that he just made toys. Dell's trying to wriggle out by saying he never saw the safe. Sykes has gone silent. We'll peel them in layers. But you've given us the wedge. For once, Wolfe, I don't resent it. Much." He stood, tucking the envelope back under his arm like it was cuffed to him. "Don't expect me to say thank you." "I would despise it if you did," Wolfe said. Mrs. Calder rose. "Mr. Wolfe, you have the thanks of the trust, though you may despise that as well. We will handle the removal of Sykes and the apology owed to Miss Vance. Art is not for sale to men who treat it as furniture." She nodded to Lennox, who nodded back as if balance sheets had suddenly acquired a moral column. When they left, only Ethan lingered. He stood near the door, pale and awkward, looking like he might either confess or collapse. He said, "Miss Vance, Eleanor, I'll resign if you want me to. I can't stand in front of a canvas and not feel like a coward." She studied him a long beat. "Pharaoh didn't think you were a coward. He thought you were young. That's not the same thing. You'll paint. Whether you redeem yourself will be in your colors, not your words." She left him with that, and the door closed on her heels. Wolfe leaned back and blew air through his nose. "Archie, get that boy out before he droops on my rug." I walked Ethan to the door. He muttered something about being grateful, though he didn't sound convinced. I told him to paint something honest for once and left him blinking at the street. When I came back, Wolfe had reached for his beer, the case already folded into the part of his mind where cases go once he's wrung them dry. He lifted the glass, sipped, and said, "You see, Archie, men will believe a candle proves trust, yet all it proves is that they prefer illusion to watchfulness. They worship a flame that does not burn, and while they applaud it, someone takes their purse. That's people for you," I said. "Always willing to clap for their own distraction." He allowed himself the smallest curl of lip. "Which is why, Archie, it is intolerable to permit them in here without charge. Illusions are expensive." He drained the glass, set it down, and closed his eyes. "Fritz will serve trout. Afterward, we will not discuss trustees, mountebanks, or the appetite of thieves. We will discuss mustard." And that was that. The brownstone settled again, quiet and orderly, as if the candle had never burned or failed to burn at all. But I could still feel its cold light in the back of my mind, the way it had pulled every gaze to itself while hands moved where eyes refused to look. Wolfe had snuffed it out with words, not wax, and that was justice enough. For now. If you've never seen a case breathe out after the main artery is cut, it looks like this. Phones go quiet, the brownstone retakes its shape, and Wolfe behaves as if nothing in the city is urgent enough to interrupt a man contemplating mustard. I let him have 20 minutes of peace and a full glass of beer before I took the chair opposite and put my feet where he could scold them. "Don't," he said without looking. I took the hint and used my mouth instead. Kramer's got the page, the board's got its spine, Sykes has got a lawyer-shaped headache, and Ethan has got a conscience. "We done?" "No," Wolfe said. "We have a ragged edge." "I dislike ragged edges." "Which one?" "The hand that wrote the instruction," he said. "The indented line on Mr. Pharaoh's page. Use rook. The state will not need it to convict. I need it to finish." "Because you enjoy symmetry," I said. "Because truth is a geometry," he said, "and if you think he doesn't believe that, you haven't watched him rearrange chairs until the room shuts up." I got Saul on the phone. He was downtown bathing in information. "Find me a scrap of Mr. Dell's hand," I told him. "Not his signature, a note, a memo, a grocery list where he tells someone to use anything." Saul said he'd bring me something that wouldn't make a handwriting man cry. While I waited, I paid Parker the courtesy of not confirming anything and the kindness of a line that would sell papers without telling lies. A ritual intended to prove trust was used to distract from theft. The candle didn't burn, other things did. He said he'd make it sing and promised me a beer he wouldn't deliver. At 3, Saul came in with a photocopy and a grin that meant it hadn't cost him blood. "Reception log from Dell's office," he said. "Visitors sign in. The receptionist writes little notes in the margin. When Dell wants a client, parked or roted, he writes, 'Use conference room,' or 'Use back door.' His words, his hand. He wrote 2 of those this morning before he left for court. The U in use looks like a horseshoe that never learned to gallop." He dropped the copy on Wolfe's blotter. The horseshoe U smiled up at us, smug and tidy. Wolfe didn't smile back. He took his time comparing slopes and strokes with the ghost we'd brought up in pencil on Pharaoh's page earlier. Then he sat still, which is as demonstrative as he gets. "It will do," he said. "Not for court, not alone. For me." "You're going to tell Kramer he gets a bow on his package," I said. "I'm going to tell Mr. Dell," he said, "that I dislike being fouled." This was not an invitation to fetch the brass knuckles. Wolfe fouls men with words and lets gravity finish them. He had me telephone Dell. Dell's voice came over the wire, crisp and clipped, the sound of a man who has been correcting people since he learned the alphabet. I told him Mr. Wolfe wished to see him at 6. He said his evening was not at Mr. Wolfe's disposal. I said it would be cheaper if it were. He said he would indulge us for 20 minutes if we promised not to waste 19. You can't hate a man for being efficient. You can hate him for the cologne he thinks improves the air. He arrived on the dot with the air of a clock that confiscates minutes. I met him at the door, checked his pockets with my eyes, and brought him into the office. He didn't sit until Wolfe nodded toward the red leather. Then he sat as if the chair had been told to behave. "Mr. Dell," Wolfe said, "I do not collect men, but I do collect facts. I have one still to store. You wrote the instruction we recovered by indention on Mr. Farrow's substituted page. Use rook. You wrote it in Mr. Sykes's study while the letters were in your possession, or Mr. Sykes's. You wrote it on a pad laid atop the page, leaving its ghost. You will not tell me a story." Dell's face did not change much. That's why men like him are useful to men like Sykes. The jaw set a millimeter tighter. "You deduce industriously. You err." Wolfe aimed his forefinger at the photocopy on the blotter and then at the shaded ghost on our sheet. "Your horseshoe U, your angular S, your habit of closing a K with an incipient loop, the pressure of your pen, excessive on downstrokes, which brought up the shadows clearly when Mr. Goodwin humored me with a soft pencil, and the word use. It is your favorite imperative. Mr. Sykes says, 'Bring and tell' because he is a host and a performer. You say 'use' because you are an instrument maker. You wrote it." "Even if I had," Dell said, voice steadier than it deserved to be. "An instruction on a scrap of pad proves nothing about theft. Advisors advise." "Advisors abet," Wolfe said. "You had graphite on your fingers last night and this afternoon. You came to fret my safe and to recover Dr. Ames's base so that my demonstration could not enlarge your jeopardy. You left your powder in Fritz's ramekin and your dust on his cinnamon because you touch things that are not yours. You pressed a memo on a pad over a stolen page. You're a man who makes arrangements for other men and leaves residue. I abhor residue." "For the benefit of my client," Dell said evenly, "I would advise you to choose your words. I could construe them as defamatory." "For the benefit of your liberty," Wolfe said, "you will construe nothing. You will listen. Inspector Kramer has the page Mr. Farrow wrote. He has the confession of Mr. Sykes's servant. He has the device Dr. Ames commissioned to facilitate a deception. He will have, in a few minutes, the log from your office in your hand, which resembles the ghost on Mr. Farrow's page, and the testimony of my cook about your powder and your trespass, which the DA will enjoy more than I did. Your client will not reward you for sharing his dock. He will trade you for air. He is a man who collects people like napkins and discards them when they are stained." Dell's mouth pressed to a line. "I've seen men choose fight. I've seen them choose run." He chose the third option, which is to look past the man accusing you and try to find the corner of the room that will save you. There isn't one in Wolfe's office. The corners belong to him. "What do you want?" Dell asked finally. Wolfe closed his eyes and brought his fingers together under his chin, a prayer someone else had to answer. "Nothing," he said. "I'm not a prosecutor, and I'm not a priest. If you wish to mutter at a confessional, the inspector's door's open. If you wish to be useful, you will bring him copies of communications in which Mr. Sykes instructs you to alter, withhold, or time the release of Mr. Farrow's letters. If you wish to be a fool, you will do nothing and trust Mr. Sykes to carry you with him." He opened his eyes. "Do not misunderstand me. I do not bargain. I am telling you where the ground is." Dell held himself together long enough to say, "You will regret your indulgence in rhetoric," and stood. I took him to the door. He paused there and looked at me the way men look at a doorman when they wish the building had been shorter. "Goodwin," he said, "one day you will work for someone who does not tolerate theater." "I do," I said. "He sits in there. He hates it." When Dell had gone, Wolfe signaled for beer, drank 2 inches, and put the glass down like a period. "Kramer," he said. I called. The inspector barked that he was busy preparing a nice welcome for a philanthropist and a psychologist, but when I told him what we had for dessert, the use-rook match and Dell's little visit, he huffed like a man who has just learned to desert his pie. "Bring me the copy, bring me the shaded page, bring me your cook," he said. "If Dell is wobbling, I'll help nature, and tell Wolfe that when this is over, I will not be sending him flowers." He would only sneer at the arrangement, I said, and hung up. Miss Vance arrived without being summoned. She has the knack people in responsibility develop. The door opens for them when they think about it. I told her where we were. She didn't change color, but the line at the corner of her mouth softened like a not learning manners. "If Dell was the hand, that completes the circle," she said. "Sykes to Ames for props, Dell for methods, Kever for action. And you for conscience," I said. "I did not enjoy it," she said, "but I won't apologize for it." Wolfe heard that and approved with a sound you have to live with him to recognize. "Madam," he said, "you may tell your board that you have a case fit not only for court, but for a museum label, a study in temptation and theater. If they have any sense, they will send Mr. Rook to paint something that does not flatter them and will endure it." He looked at me. "Tomorrow at 11 we will receive Inspector Kramer for the last time on this matter. He will bring charges as if he had invented them. We will endure it." That night was quiet. Fritz served trout as promised, and Wolfe gave Mustard the attention he had threatened. He read afterward with his eyes actually on the page, which is how you know he has put men away in their compartments and left them to clatter on their own. I took a walk to see if the city had changed its face. It hadn't. It never does when you want it to. In the morning, Kramer showed up 15 minutes early with the look of a man who has slept less than his anger. He had papers. He had satisfaction. He had a cigar he did not light because Fritz would have strangled him with a dish towel. "It holds," he said without announcing good morning. "The page is Pharaoh's. The indention on it is a match in stroke and habits with 2 note scraps we pulled out of Dell's trash can this morning. The prop maker sang about the bases until we offered him a hymnal. Ames is cooperating like a man who wants to keep his license to sell candles in church basements. Kever is making a statement that will read like a calendar. Sykes has learned a new word, continuance. He won't like the way it tastes." "You see?" Wolfe said. And if that sounds smug, it wasn't. It was relief wearing its best suit. He does not like men who have learned to eat virtue. He likes them less when they ask to be admired for chewing. "Don't go soft on me," Kramer said. "You enjoy this." "I enjoy order," Wolfe said. "You provide it with clubs. I prefer chairs and words." Kramer set the papers down and pointed one thick finger at the candle on the side table. The first one, Miss Vance's box souvenir, the idol that had caused all this prostration. "You keeping that?" "I am," Wolfe said. "It is instructive. A light that does not burn is a metaphor so obvious even a lawyer could manage it." Kramer grunted something that might have been a laugh's cousin. "Don't put it in the window. People will think you're open." He looked at me. "You'll come downtown this afternoon to sign, Goodwin. You too, Fritz, about your kitchen dust. Don't dress it up." "Just tell it true," Fritz said from the doorway. "I always do," and made it sound like a promise to God. When Kramer left, the brownstone did the thing it does, took back its walls, lowered its pulse, and made a space for silence. Wolfe sank a fraction in his chair. He doesn't sag. He settles like a building that has decided it has earned the right to stand. "It is done," he said. "Except for dinner," I said. "Dinner," he allowed, "is never done. It resumes." I was headed for the door when the bell rang. I took it. Ethan Rook stood there with a rectangle wrapped in brown paper under his arm and the look of a man who is about to do something unnecessary in order to go on living. I brought him in. Wolfe looked up like Zeus tolerating a petitioner. "I brought this," Ethan said, and put the package on the corner of the desk as if it might startle. I unwrapped it. It was a study, oil, small, of a candle on a table. The wick was black. The light in the room came from a window far to the left, invisible, painting the candlestick with a glow that was not its own. On the table, near the base, a thin thread caught light and ran to the edge and disappeared off the canvas. It wasn't subtle. It was honest. "I didn't come to say thank you," Ethan said. "I came to say I see it now." He looked at Miss Vance and then away. "I'll paint. If you don't want me at the trust, I'll paint in a closet, but I won't be used again." Miss Vance said, "Then don't be. We'll see if your talent can live with that." Wolfe studied the painting long enough to make the air shift. "You have learned something," he said. "Whether you can remember it when money speaks is another question. You will answer it in your work." Ethan nodded, took back the painting when Wolfe glanced at it like a waiter reminding a diner he doesn't eat wall hangings, and left. When the door closed, Wolfe harumphed. "You don't hang parables," he said. "You eat lunch." Which, for my money, was as close to benediction as he was going to issue. I told Fritz we would require nothing flaming and no candles that had not signed affidavits. The brownstone, finally, was itself again. The ragged edge had been snipped. The geometry held. And if you think that sounds like a lot of words for a candle that refused to burn, you have not yet been to a room where men prefer fire that doesn't heat to truth that does. When a case closes, you'd think Wolfe would allow the brownstone to stretch out and bask in its peace like a cat in a sunbeam. You'd be wrong. The man can't leave a puzzle without a postscript, and this one had furnished him with enough material to annotate for weeks. By the time Fritz set down breakfast the next day, scrambled eggs that looked like they'd been personally combed, Wolfe was already muttering to himself about candles, trust, and the appetites of men. I've seen him mutter about mustard blends and Roman emperors, but muttering about trust was a new one. The paper that morning had 3 inches of column devoted to Ambrose Sykes. It was the Gazette, so Parker had sanded the edges until it looked like corruption with a lace trim, but it was enough to keep Sykes's phone ringing from now until judgment. Dr. Ames had his own sidebar, psychologist's ritual used in art trust scandal, which sounded more like a carnival advertisement than an indictment. Dell's name didn't appear, which told me he was already trying to sink beneath his client's shadow. Ethan Rook rated half a sentence. Young artist misled. The paper had mercy. Wolfe would not. When I carried it in, Wolfe pushed aside his plate and read. His lips twitched once, the way a man's do when vinegar hits the tongue. "They will forget within a week," he said. "That's the news," I said. "You'd prefer chisels on stone." "I would prefer memory," he said. "Men who forget are men who repeat." He folded the paper with more disgust than force. "Archie, I detest rituals. I detest more when they are used to sanctify theft." "You don't say," I said, though he already had at length and would again. At 11, the bell rang. It was Miss Vance, punctual, collected, and carrying herself like she had rehearsed for a hearing. She didn't wait to be asked before taking the red chair. "The board has removed Sykes," she said, without any frosting. It was unanimous, though Dell tried to delay the vote until his client could defend himself. "We passed a resolution to thank you for your intervention. You will not receive it in writing, because the board abhors leaving trails, but I am instructed to convey it." Wolfe grunted. "I despise thanks, but I will endure it." She nodded as if she'd expected that. The Pharaoh letters will remain with Inspector Kramer until trial. The trust will not contest. We will make do without Sykes's money, and we will cultivate smaller donors who do not confuse benefaction with possession. That, Wolfe said, will require vigilance. It will require memory, she said, and for once he inclined his head as if someone else had struck the exact note of his own thought. She rose then, smoothing her skirt, but before she left, she paused. Mr. Wolfe, if you ever want to hang something in your house that is not an orchid, I know an artist who is learning the value of honesty. Phooey, Wolfe said, though not without gentleness. I do not decorate my walls with parables. She smiled, the faintest suggestion of it, and went. After she had gone, Wolfe closed his eyes and sat silent long enough that I thought he might have folded the whole business into the vault of things he would not revisit. But then he spoke. Archie, what have we learned? That candles don't always melt, I said. He ignored me. We have learned that symbols are dangerous when they are mistaken for substance, that a man who praises loyalty often seeks obedience, that a young man's fear can be harvested as readily as his talent, and that even paper can tell the truth if you are patient enough to shade its ghosts. That's a sermon, I said. You should have charged extra. Bah, he said. I will charge myself with indigestion if I persist. He reached for his book and opened it to a page he had no intention of reading. Dinner will be braised duck. I will not be disturbed. Which was the cue for me to leave him to his muttering and make peace with the city outside. But I knew, as I stepped onto the stoop, that Wolfe had closed this case the way he closes them all. Not with a bang, not even with a flame, but with words laid in their proper order until deception collapsed under its own weight. The brownstone was itself again, silent, sealed, waiting for the next trespass. And me, I was content. Because in a world where men trust a candle that never burns, somebody has to keep watch for the hand that moves while everyone else is staring at the flame. The brownstone has seen its share of quiet evenings after storms, but this one had a stillness that felt earned. The case of the candle that wouldn't burn had collapsed the way all Wolfe's cases do, not with fireworks, but with the sound of lies suffocating in their own smoke. The papers sang about Sykes's fall, Ames's disgrace, and Dell's convenient cooperation, but in here the air smelled only of Fritz's braised duck and Wolfe's beer. It was after dinner when I found Wolfe in his chair, heavier than ever with satisfaction, and asked the one question that hadn't stopped scratching me. So tell me, why this one? You've ignored richer clients and grander scandals. What made you take Miss Vance's candle trick seriously? His eyes opened just enough to let me know I had interrupted a thought worth more than mine. Because, Archie, trifles trespass. The brownstone was disturbed, an object meant to symbolize trust delivered here to my desk. Such intrusions I do not permit. Besides, betrayal disguised as virtue is the foulest odor. It clings. He shut his eyes again, but not before adding, and because men who let themselves be governed by a toy deserve to be shown how foolish they are. That was as close to philosophy as he was willing to come, so I let him have his silence. Outside, the city ran its racket, but in here, justice had been served in words, not warrants. Miss Vance had her integrity intact. Ethan had his lessons scorched into him, and Wolfe had his geometry of truth aligned to his satisfaction. As for me, I closed my notebook on the last line of the case and thought about the candle locked away in the safe. It had promised light without flame, warmth without heat, trust without risk. Just like Sykes, just like every man who believes deception can stand in for substance. Wolfe had snuffed both with the same method, patient deduction and a refusal to be fooled. The brownstone was silent again, orderly, unshaken. Fritz would serve coffee in the morning, orchids would bloom upstairs, and Wolfe would return to his routines. But I knew, as I always do, that somewhere out there another trespass was already being prepared, waiting to test the walls of the house that never bends. And when it came, Wolfe would be ready, rooted in his chair, with me running the errands and the risk. Because that's how it always is, and that's how it always will be. The case of the candle that burned without flame was closed, 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 was closed,